Tonight, Russia vowing revenge, a nation in mourning after a deadly shooting at a Moscow concert hall. Standing together in grief.
An egregious failure on the part of the Russian government and Putin personally.
The president insisting a link to Ukraine as the death toll rises.
Doing in Alberta.
Threats against prominent politicians.
I didn't sign up for hate, misogyny.
Hostility on the rise as trust in Canadian democracy falls. Plus, creating a perfect path to the solar eclipse.
It's very stressful, but, it's fun.
Soaring sky high for a celestial event.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. Russia is in mourning after the death of more than 130 people following an attack on a concert hall in Moscow. A rare silence over the city 2 days after gunmen opened fire. Crowds gathered to leave flowers. Some families still awaiting word on loved ones as crews sift through the scene. The death toll is rising as Vladimir Putin insists a link to Ukraine. CTV's Jeremy Sharon reports.
A candle lit in this Moscow church by President Vladimir Putin as his country observes a national day of mourning. Flowers and tributes piled up outside this Russian concert hall. Hundreds of mourners line these streets today after a terrorist attack here killed more than 130 people and left more than 100 wounded. It is a tragedy that has affected our entire country, this woman says. It just doesn't make sense. The suspects, arrested Friday, were taken to court today. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the worst massacre in Russia in years.
A couple of weeks ago, the U.S. actually issued a terrorist warning for Moscow for its citizens. I believe it provided intelligence to the Russian security services, saying it had solid information that ISIS was planning something in Moscow, and specifically against concert halls. So it looks like, given that warning, given what the U.S. knew and passed on, it certainly seems credible that Islamic State is behind this attack.
The Kremlin claims the suspects were captured trying to escape to Ukraine. Kyiv has denied any involvement in Friday's assault.
There is no whatsoever any evidence, and in fact what we know to be the case is that ISIS-K is actually, by all accounts, responsible for what happened.
Crews searched the rubble and what is left of the concert hall today, tearing down walls so rescue crews and their dogs could get in. I ran among the ambulances, searched among the crews, and asked questions, but I couldn't find anyone, says Igor Pogadayev, whose wife was at the concert hall and is still missing.
Moscow's Department of Health said today it has started identifying the bodies of those killed, but that process will take at least 2 weeks. Heather?
Jeremy, thank you. Poland is demanding answers from the Kremlin, saying a missile breached Polish airspace during a massive aerial attack on Ukraine. Sirens rang out across Kyiv during the third major airstrike on Ukraine in just 4 days. Ukraine says its defense systems destroyed 43 of the 57 missiles and drones launched by Russia during this latest attack. A rise in anti-Semitism flagged by police as a growing problem since the escalation of the Israel-Hamas war brought people together today in front of Ontario's legislature. They're calling on politicians across the country to double down on acts of hate in all forms. CTV's Tony Grace has more.
Together we will raise our voices in every province across Canada.
A collective pledge.
And Never Again starts now!
From the newly formed Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism.
I get phone calls at home. People threatening. I mean, it's a reality, today reality. This is the life we're living.
Advocates and allies urging all levels of government to step up.
Because when one community, one minority in this country is threatened, we all are.
From synagogues to schools and restaurants, many police forces in Canada have had more reports of hate crimes since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. In Toronto, a 93% jump in overall hate crimes since October 7th, with more than half of those reported this year anti-Semitic in nature. At the same time, acts of Islamophobia are believed to be underreported to police.
Over the last few months, we've just seen an alarming rise of Islamophobia.
The National Council of Canadian Muslims receiving up to a dozen calls a day about incidents in schools, workplaces, and businesses, urging faster action on new federal funding.
To ensure that our places of worship are protected in a preventative manner rather than a reactive manner.
At this anti-Semitism rally today, the deputy Conservative leader addressing the calls.
How do you balance what's going on with hate against religious groups at this time of the Israel-Hamas conflict?
Look, no matter who you are, when you pray, whether it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or not at all, no matter what language you speak, no matter what color you are, you should feel safe doing whatever you want to do in this country.
And acknowledging the Jewish observance of Purim, the Prime Minister saying, in the face of rising anti-Semitism, we will always stand with you against hate. A recent Senate report made 13 recommendations on combating Islamophobia, while a Conservative senator is also pushing for a new national summit on anti-Semitism. Heather.
Tony, thank you. On the eve of Greek Independence Day, celebrations took to the streets of Montreal. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau walked in the parade with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. In a sit-down interview with CTV's Question Period, he expressed interest in purchasing Canada's liquefied natural gas if it were made available.
We are a big entry point for LNG, not just for the Greek market, but also for the Balkans, for Eastern Europe. Theoretically, we could even supply Ukraine.
The Greek leader held official meetings with Trudeau discussing the economy and the Middle East. It's the first time a Greek prime minister has visited Canada in 40 years. Threats against Canadian politicians have become increasingly normalized, says a report from the RCMP and the security body that monitors Canadian elections. Extremist narratives fueled by personal grievances and misinformation becoming more common. It's changing the political landscape, with many calling for more action. Here's CTV's Colton Prail.
Accosted in hallways. What are you doing in Alberta?
And targeted at campaign stops. There's a reason parliamentarians travel with security. But a report from the federal task force that safeguards Canadian elections says threats against politicians are becoming increasingly normalized, driven largely by disinformation and focused particularly on women.
Scumbag pieces of
I think there needs to be taken action against social media companies. I think security agencies need to take it seriously, and actually in many cases they're going to have to provide more security. It took a long time for that to happen in my case.
A June 2023 assessment by the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, obtained by the Canadian press, warns anti-authority narratives are influencing ideologically motivated violent extremists. A recent RCMP report cautioned political polarization would likely increase, fueled by foreign interference.
Much of this, although not exclusively, is driven by our adversaries that are using social media as a force multiplier for these types of grievances.
Ideologically motivated violent extremism was thrust into the spotlight after a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol and protesters took over Parliament Hill.
For a long time, we worried about, violent extremists who might take bombs or weapons to Parliament. And now we're worried about mobs of people armed with hockey sticks.
While the report says Canada isn't at risk of revolt, there is little offered to counter anti-authority sentiments, despite trust plummeting in the country's democracy and the institutions that allow it to function.
A price has to be attached to it to some degree. That's going to be a continuing and very difficult thing to manage, particularly now that we're seeing AI producing the possibility of very convincing deep fakes.
Experts say Canada needs to do much more to prepare itself for an election campaign that will see foreign interference and disinformation campaigns run at an industrial scale. Heather.
Colton Prail in Ottawa for us. Thank you. South of the border now, time is running out for Donald Trump to post a bond of nearly $500 million as he tries to appeal a judgment for financial fraud. Trump has just hours to come up with the money or risk having his bank accounts frozen and some of his assets seized. The deadline comes on the same day the former president will return to court in New York, where a judge could set a start date for his looming criminal trial related to alleged hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. As tenants across this country struggle to afford skyrocketing rent and face eviction, some are refusing to pay and stay for free. It's creating a bitter battle with landlords, now compounded by renters using delays in the court system as leverage. CTV's Caitlin Wilson explains.
It's costing us is our sanity, our health, and our ability to function on a day-to-day basis.
Varun Sriskanda is a property manager in Ottawa. He sees firsthand the toll it takes on landlords when tenants don't pay their rent.
We are seeing homeowners and landlords lose their properties. We're seeing them go into significant debt just to hold on to the houses.
That's because landlords are waiting months or longer for a hearing at the Landlord and Tenant Board as their bills pile up.
We waste about 1 year going to a hearing that we know from the very start it will go in the landlord's favor.
Between 2022 and 2023, the board received more than 37,000 applications to evict tenants who failed to pay rent. But that year, only 7% were heard within its target of 50 to 55 calendar days.
It's the small guys that are getting obliterated. They're the ones that are going bankrupt, not the big operators. So the issues at the LTB have a dramatic impact.
This Toronto landlord estimates he loses $15,000 to $30,000 each year in unpaid rent. And he recently started this petition calling on the Ontario government to implement automatic evictions.
I don't believe that there's any adjudication process required. It should simply be, here's an order, you need to move out.
He believes the change would help alleviate the backlog, create more rental units, and incentivize more landlords to enter the market. But tenant advocates don't agree, saying it's simply part of the risk that comes with renting out a property. They say speeding up the process could mean fewer rights for tenants. CTV News reached out to the Ministry of Housing and the Landlord and Tenant Board for comment, but did not hear back in time for deadline.
Caitlin Wilson, CTV News, Ottawa.
Canada's healthcare system is suffering from an acute shortage of doctors, with medical centres in rural communities facing serious staffing issues. One Newfoundland hospital looking for a new oncologist is offering a huge signing bonus. Still, no takers. CTV's Garrett Berry on what that means for patients.
It's a brand new hospital with brand new equipment. After years of political debate in the province, the doors are almost ready to open at this Corner Brook Hospital. There's just one problem: not enough doctors.
Right now, the reality is we're in a bit of a trough in terms of supply. We only graduate about 20 to 25 radiation oncologists per year in Canada, only one in Atlantic Canada per year, typically.
Think Grand Seduction, the 2013 movie about a fishing village going to great lengths to attract a doctor.
Is this for real?
But in the real world, Newfoundland and Labrador deals with cold hard cash. For these two jobs, there's a base salary of more than $260,000. Bonuses by the provincial government could boost that figure to more than $500,000 in the first year. That still might not be enough.
We're recruiting against competitors in Ontario, BC, Alberta, and the remuneration out there is actually much higher again. So it is a factor.
The hospital is set to open in June, but in the Corner Brook area, some wonder if cancer patients will still have to travel the 688-kilometer trip to get to St. John's for treatment.
I had a family member that was in St. John's for 5 weeks. I spent 5 weeks with him. It's not nice. You're living out of your house. It costs us money to live in St. John's in a hotel, plus you got a home back in Corner Brook that got to be taken care of. And you're away from your family.
Critics say health officials had a lot of time to get ready for this.
This should have been ongoing last 4, 5, 6 years, starting when they're in med school, to entice them to come to Corner Brook.
These jobs come with a big payday, but candidates are in high demand. There's job postings in Alberta that would pay these doctors as much as $464,000 a year. A sign of a big bidding war that threatens to leave small and rural hospitals behind. Garrett Berry, CTV News, St. John's.
Coming up, a sweet season facing uncertainty.
We have had a surge in demand and exports in terms of maple syrup in the last 3 to 4 years.
Tapping into reserves and the plan to avoid a sappy ending. Plus, a clever workaround to catch a total eclipse. A billion-dollar industry for a familiar household staple, maple syrup, is at risk. Canada has been forced to tap into its reserves to make up for shortages, with some concerned it's running dangerously low. CTV's Kamal Karamali reports on the warming winters disrupting the flow of Canada's liquid gold.
Here at this maple syrup farm just outside Toronto, an unusually warm winter is stirring up trouble.
So we've seen quite an earlier sap running this year.
Mild temperatures for the second straight winter means another early start to tapping trees.
A lot of people, even backyard producers, weren't ready at the time when the sap was flowing.
It's a problem at many maple farms across Quebec and Ontario.
Milder weather, lower sugar in the sap, that warm spells, all those things are kind of, they're pushing down on production.
All of this coming at a time when the entire country's maple syrup reserves are extremely low. The reserves in place to make sure there's always a consistent supply of maple syrup to export. A few years ago, it held over 100 million pounds of syrup, but this past year, less than 7 million pounds, a low that hasn't been seen in 15 years.
We have had a surge in demand and exports in terms of maple syrup in the last 3 to 4 years. And during that time span, we have had more problem producing maple syrup.
Trouble caused by those less than ideal weather conditions. But there is confidence that this year, even with the mild winter and early start to the season, producers will be able to add to the reserves.
There's really no need to panic right now.
But now keeping a close watch on what the future of Canadian maple syrup production looks like, with climate change mixing up an already delicate process. Kamal Karamali, CTV News, Toronto.
Still ahead, no more soggy straws. The invention that's in the pipeline. You've likely experienced it, the soggy truth about paper straws after sitting in your drink for too long. Now, one Regina researcher is looking to fix the problem, developing a biodegradable version that lasts longer and is better suited for the environment. CTV's Alison Bamford has more.
Yeah, I don't really like it when it gets soggy.
It's a catch-22. Paper straws are better for the environment, but consumer reviews couldn't be much worse.
They get really mushy in between while you're drinking.
Don't like them, not one bit.
Canadians use about 16 million straws every day, and usually they don't last longer than the ice in your drink.
You can't really enjoy your drink because you're getting little chunks.
But inside this University of Regina research lab, a possible solution.
Our whole idea is trying to make a straw that you can suck through that doesn't suck.
Denise Stilling's research, funded through the provincial government and Canada Agriculture Partnership, started before plastic straws were banned in the country, initially looking for ways to repurpose agricultural waste like flax straw that farmers can't use.
I would like to see a more sustainable future from it.
These straws, dyed to differentiate each batch, contain a mixture of pulped fibers, starch, and beeswax. Testing shows the prototypes can last longer in water and biodegrade faster than the average paper straw.
And little rough on the sides.
Some are more promising than others, but within these hundreds of straws, they think there's a winner.
I'll call it my secret formula.
The next step is to gather consumer feedback. There are other biodegradable straws out there made from bamboo and even wheat stalks. But Stilling says the market is big enough for competitors, and she hopes her small-scale lab production can reach the commercial industry. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
Musicians from across Canada are being recognized at the Juno Awards. Pop duo Tegan and Sarah claiming the Humanitarian Award, using their speech to take aim at the Alberta government.
Threats like the Alberta government's attempt to prevent trans youth from accessing vital care.
The pair calling out what they described as, quote, discrimination that threatens the well-being of the LGBTQ2S+ community. Another Canadian golden triumph in Nova Scotia, this one on the ice at the World Women's Curling Championship.
No time on the clock to go through any options.
And that's it. Canada, the Holman Empire, will rule the world.
Canada dethroned the defending champions from Switzerland, capturing their first world crown since 2018. The Canadians dominated the field, losing only once the entire tournament. Congratulations. After the break, preparing for the solar eclipse.
The last time there'd been an eclipse in this part of New Brunswick, or in fact most of the province, was in 932, more than 1,000 years ago.
Forget the glasses. We're turning to a flying telescope for a clear view. As many Canadians get their glasses ready for the upcoming solar eclipse, one group in New Brunswick is preparing to capture it with a perfect view. CTV's Sarah Plowman has the story.
It's topped with a solar telescope, wired together with computers and cameras.
This is our, quote, live video camera, which is looking horizontally.
The flying telescope sits in David Hunter's kitchen, but on April 8th will attach to a balloon and fly above the clouds to capture the moment the moon completely blocks the sun and stream it back to Earth.
It will be even better than just staying on the ground, though, because we'll have a very high up panoramic view of things, and we hope to see the shadow of the moon.
His aha moment came before the pandemic, when the retired medical physicist realized his hometown of Florenceville, Bristol, New Brunswick, is in the direct path of the next total solar eclipse.
And the last time there'd been an eclipse in this part of New Brunswick, or in fact most of the province, was in 932, more than 1,000 years ago.
So clouds don't ruin it, volunteers have spent countless hours aiming higher. The balloon-borne telescope can fly up to 30 kilometers in the air. Special cameras can track the sun, sending the images onto YouTube for all to see.
It's just interesting, but it's very stressful, but you know, it's fun.
After flawed attempts and lessons learned, the volunteer team is ready to go.
I think the biggest thing is how you can get a team of people together and get something done.
Too much wind, rain, or snow could cause trouble. The focus now is on the what-ifs.
The big fly in the ointment, of course, is the weather.
Hunter says some have questioned why he's worked so much on this.
I consider our circumstances very fortuitous here, and the total solar eclipse exemplifies that to me.
Welcoming a community and the world on board for a once-in-a-lifetime project. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Florenceville, Bristol, New Brunswick.
Such dedication for a perfect view. That is our show for this Sunday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night.